Hello, everyone. This is the overview video for our emphasis experiment. I will go into the individual conversations about your work in videos after this. You'll find your name attached to those, but this is an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about the project in a more generalized way, kind of discuss some of the questions that you all may be thinking about, but also to point out some things that I think are important for everyone to understand, and what I'm hoping that we have in terms of a takeaway on the project and moving forward. So to start off, some of you might be sort of wondering maybe about where a project like this, might have come from, or why we would start with a project where we're focusing on the emphasis of things, where it's very highly structured, it's very formalized in terms of the framework in which you're being asked to make photographs. The course is an expressive composition course, yet we didn't really cover compositional structure or frameworks. We didn't really talk about that. We mostly talked about a methodology of setting up the process. When we got ready to go, we chose a subject, or a subject was chosen for you. We discussed a process that you were going to go through in order to make those photographs, but we really didn't cover any one particular compositional strategy or structure, as we will be further into the course. So why would we start with a project like this one rather than the other? Well, there's several reasons. Many of you have heard me discuss composition and visual language as just that, as a language. And most people start out learning a language or approach language through conversation, through speech, prior to literacy. So in other words, people tend to be able to speak a language and listen and understand the language before they can read and write the language. And so there's a certain intuitive tendency that we can hear and speak sooner, perhaps, than we might be able to read and write, because reading and writing is a whole nother sort of process in terms of a language. So when we're talking about compositional structure, what we're talking about is a sort of reading and writing. We talked about composition as being kind of a grammar to visual language. And so a project like this, we take away sort of the writing part of it, the application and the thinking heavily about a structure or a grammar. What we're left with is the subject, and then the effort to express a bit of content. In this case, a theme that we kind of put out there. What it's helping us do is it's one, liberating you from that sort of formal structure a bit, but it's also allowing me to make some observations about the class, the various skill levels that everyone has. This class is not limited to photo majors or art majors. It's open up to many different students from all over, and some have quite a bit of experience. Some are brand new to photography altogether. And so some of you may intuitively have been working with photography for a long time, and intuitively are drawn to arranging things through a lens. And for some others, this may be a new experience, and so it may be a little bit awkward at first. Some have been working with formal composition and know a lot of the language already and have been applying it. And others maybe are applying some of these principles that we're going to be talking about in the course, but don't even know that you're doing it. And so it would be it would be a disservice, I guess, to taint the pool by telling you what you're doing before you're doing it, to just observe and see what are your inclinations, what are some of your tendencies, or what are some of the things that you are kind of intuitively, naturally drawn to. So with the project itself, of course, we have this framework or structure that we work with. And I like to think of it as those frameworks as kind of like, you know, if you were writing, you have different types of forming those things. You can write in a kind of a poetic form. You can write, and even poetics have different structures, iambic pentameter, and all of those other kinds of things. You can write sentence structure grammatically correct. You can write in a formal way, an informal way, and so on and so forth. And so what we've done is created a structure so that you know that you're going to be making images in a very particular formal way. All through your careers, you're going to be doing this self-imposed. I mean, it's not limited to sort of beginning learning where you would identify a structure and go with it. We might identify structures really to sort of allow us to focus on certain components of our work. We make decisions about certain things so that the work will automatically have these sort of connections, and then it sort of liberates us from some other things. For instance, we may create a structure where all photographs are done from a certain perspective, or from a certain distance, as we did. There may be a certain subject that we are repeating over and over and over again, or a subject type that we're repeating over and over and over again. That would be a sort of formalizing of one of the art ingredients in order to do that. There's a series of photographs made by the Beechers, I believe, that's their last name. It was a husband and wife group. They made photographs of water towers all over the world, water towers. And these water towers were composed in the frame identically. In other words, they composed the size of the water tower, regardless of how big it was. Some of the water towers were enormous, and some of them were rather modest in size. But in the photograph, they were framed up so that they appeared to be, the tanks, all the same size. So there was no size variation in the water towers in the photograph. They all appeared to be centrally located, so on and so forth. So they did everything possible to homogenize all the other factors. These are all water towers. They're all centrally located. They're all in black and white. And so what happened was, when you go through this series of images, which they were dozens and dozens and dozens from all over the world, what happens is we begin to look at not the fact that they are all the same, but the subtle differences in all of them, which draws attention. All of the little things that might be different about them, not the immediate things that might be different, like the shape or the size. It gets to be more about like the details, like a wire here, or a piece of rust or something like that. And so these are the ways that these sort of formalizing things can not inhibit us, but actually free us to be thinking about other things, and also direct our audiences to what we are thinking of. So our structure, being that we started out with this sort of idea where we're going to do this sort of circumference concept, where we're ever so slowly coming in on a subject, circling it as we go, cutting the distance in half each time. We have a subject or an object of our imagery, but we're not just using the object to, identify it. The object being a building, it wasn't presented as a thing that we're making a photograph of. We were simply asked to use the building in order to approach certain prompts, certain phrases that were thrown out there. Those are we can consider to be the content of the photograph. So we had things like line and shape and color. At the very beginning, the largest distance was in the environment. And so the idea was that you had these sort of concepts or ideas or themes to be focusing on, rather than portraying the subject, because the camera will do that whether we want it to or not. It's going to portray the subject. Cameras are very good at portraying subjects. We don't really have to try to do that. It'll do it on its own. To use a subject in order to portray something that we intend to communicate, now that is where we come in to the story. So the idea was to rather than use a camera to portray a subject, which is very simple, what we want to do is use the camera to capture an idea and to communicate that to the audience. And so that is where the expressive and the individual nature of your photography comes in. So as we move forward, moving in, you had a different compositional strategy. And we're looking at the building from different perspectives. When we move closer, those concepts got a little bit more clear, where you're just looking at line. It was irrelevant without it was a building, right? It didn't matter that we were looking at cement or looking at the color gray. We were looking for line to be communicated through the photograph. We wanted the audience to get the idea that we want them to see and consider line. And that's a very simple thing to do. It's a formal thing. So what we want to present is this: we want you to see line or color or texture or tone or shadow. All of those things are very simple, yet when we really think about them, they can be very rich and they can be very complex. We can explore shadow for months and months and months, and really get into the subtlety of how that works, especially through photography. So what that tells me is that, where you are in this kind of ability to translate those things, it also hopefully informs you a little bit about how you approach making imagery in terms of distance. So there were certain distances that you were probably more comfortable with, or at the very least more relaxed in, where the images may have come to you more quickly, or they felt more obvious, or they seem to make more sense to you. When you are at different distances, maybe there was a struggle as to how to put it together, or you weren't exactly sure of yourself, and those kinds of things. How did you feel at the different distances? Your emotional state. Like if you were very tense and like, I have no idea where to take photographs here, everything seems to be sort of out of order, or I can't seem to figure this one out at this distance. Nothing seems to be kind of calling to me, those kinds of things. That's an important thing to observe in you. And when you are making photographs, when you're making art, it is important to be identifying, how do I feel at this time? How am I feeling? Because you are internally responding to what's happening in the environment and through the process. And if you're in touch with that, you can use it. You can use that to motivate you toward finding sort of solutions and finding ways in which you can sort of further express what your intention for the photo is. And so if you know what your intention is to express something like line, then you'll know whether you're struggling with it or not. If you have no intention, if you have no idea, you're just wandering in to make photographs, and then you become frustrated because you're not being satisfied, it becomes doubly frustrating, because you don't know why you're frustrated and you don't know what you're looking for. So again, these frameworks and then these themes, they're not meant to sort of squash your creativity. They're meant to help sort of get you through some of these things. Tells me what some of your natural tendencies are. When during the process, many of you asked questions about the photographs, and I actually pointed out a few things. Pointed out maybe about your use of certain design structures, or I would ask you about what it was that you were attempting to portray, what it was that you were looking at here, or I would say, what's going on over here? What is it? What part of of your intent? What is it about this area that's contributing to the image? And basically putting it to you to be sort of looking at that. It's not for me to tell you whether your imagery is good or bad. I can make observations, and those observations are both of your imagery and of where you are, the observations being figuring out just what you're trying to achieve, and then offering you some guidance on how you can find it, rather than just telling you, oh, this is what you ought to do. Inevitably, that's going to be a solution that is my solution. And as wonderfully confident I am in my solutions, they're not yours. And I wouldn't want you to be stuck with my solutions. I'm very excited about how you develop your solutions. So when I do offer you that kind of feedback, I'm not trying to be elusive or anything like that. What I'm really trying to do is maintain your autonomy in your photographs. So when we do these projects, it's much more than just an exercise to get done. It's much more than really the individual parts of it. There are multiple things that are happening to it. Thinking about how you were feeling when you were making the photographs at these individual distances, observing some of the things that you were doing and didn't do, taking a look at the imagery that you chose to post, and making some observations as to not just that you posted it, but what is it about this one that seems to stand out for you. And then when you are able to identify that, then identifying what exactly am I looking at here? What is it that I was seeing in this image? Am I looking at light? Am I looking at lines? Am I looking at, what is it that I'm actually seeing here? The more closely you're able to identify that afterward, the better prepared you're going to be moving forward. Because you see, we don't want to be necessarily evaluating our work while we're making it. We want to really be just mindfully intuitive and in the moment when we're making the work. We don't want the judge, we don't want the guardian to come in and sort of start analyzing for us and telling us what's right and wrong. We want the creative to be at work there and to feel totally relaxed and comfortable doing the work. It's only afterward that we can kind of sit back and allow the judge, allow the guardian to kind of come in and take a look, and use those other skills to kind of figure some things out, and then have this kind of conversation between the logic and the creativity as to, okay, so what was the intent and how was I working through that, and what is best going to serve me? Because sometimes the most exciting photograph or the most beautiful photograph won't be the one that serves us best. We may be very excited about an image that is counter to our intent. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, is this, going to help me? Or is this image, no matter how beautiful it is it really the direction that I need to be going in, if I'm trying to achieve a certain thing? And so that happens, where you have this image and you're really attached to it, and yet it just doesn't work for what you're trying to achieve. You love it, you put it aside, you mark it, and you put it into a certain special folder that you have for images that you'll come back to later and perhaps look at for inspiration to move forward when you are in a place where that suits the direction you're working in. But you're really looking at that point when you're editing images that are meant to be taking you where you intend to go, not a random sort of accidental creativity. That's fun sometimes, and it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. But really, if we want to be consistent, if we want to be able to count on ourselves to create when we need to create, which is called a career, we need to be able to focus on an intent and be able to follow it through from beginning to end. So that's what I have just as an overview, just as a talk. And from here, you can look for your individual reviews on your work itself. All right. Bye-bye now.